A very warm welcome to all our listeners to the next episode of the Equiverse Voices. Equiverse, a universe where gender equity is the norm. Here we delve into various pathways to restore gender equity. In today's episode, we are stepping into the world of urban design and reimagining how our cities can become more inclusive and equitable spaces for all. Joining us today are two incredible voices in this field. First, we have ElsaMarie D'Silva, a prominent social entrepreneur and the founder of the Red Dot Foundation. Elsa's groundbreaking work in promoting safer urban spaces and documenting experiences of sexual and gender based violence through her platform has paved a way for a more inclusive community involvement and urban planning. Welcome, Elsa, to this episode. And alongside, we have Suparna Banerjee, a passionate advocate for smart cities, integrating technology and design to enhance safety and accessibility in urban environments. With a focus on practical interventions and community driven solutions, Suparna brings a wealth of knowledge on how we can create more equitable cities. Welcome, Suparna, to our podcast. Now let's embark on our exploration of how urban spaces can be reimagined to ensure safety, accessibility, and inclusivity to all, and thereby help us build a more equitable world. Over to you, Suparna.
Thank you, Ipsita. It's really a pleasure to be here. And Elsa, it's really good to meet you again. So let's start with this gender equity, inclusive urban space is a very big area. Can you tell us how you define it, and in your work, what are the specific areas that you address, and why is this important to do?
Thanks, Suparno, for having me and Ipsita too. So, I believe urban spaces should be inclusive for all. And when we say all, it's not just men, it's also women, LGBTQ communities, children, and senior citizens, people with different abilities, etc. Now, are they inclusive? Of course not. And how do I know that? It's because of the work that I do with Red Dot Foundation. I started on this journey about 12 years ago after the horrific gang rape of a young woman on a bus in Delhi. That incident was a catalytic event which made me think more deeply about my own experiences of being sexually harassed on the streets of Mumbai, in the transportation, buses, and trains, and also at the workplace. And shortly after the gang rape incident, I launched a platform along with my friends called Safecity, which is an anonymous crowd map for documenting personal experiences of sexual and gender based violence. And through these stories, I have learned that I was not alone. There are so many other women, and now even we have other genders reporting, male and LGBTQ including, talking about their experiences. And, whilst we may think, what has this got to do with inclusion in urban spaces? Often they tend to exclude people. So, for example, my own experience of being groped as a 13-year-old on a crowded Mumbai train made me hate traveling by train in Mumbai. And if you've been to Mumbai, you know it's one of the most convenient, the fastest method of traveling from one end of the city to the other. And I would prefer driving and getting stuck in traffic for 3 hours, which is not a sustainable mode of transportation. And it's also a privileged mode of transportation. So, when you weigh the alternatives based on your experiences, I think inclusion forces us to think about who's being left out, who's being left behind. Are the experiences of all the residents the same, or are they made to feel the same? Are they made to feel safe? Are they made to feel welcomed in those spaces? And then we design that infrastructure accordingly.
Picking up from that, I think that was, an excellent introduction, and you narrowed it down. How would you turn that into your vision of a gender inclusive city, and coming from the vision, how what would be, in your opinion, the key components of a truly inclusive urban environment?
So, I live in Mumbai, and many of my volunteers, interns, and even team members from Delhi, when we bring them to Mumbai for a retreat, and if they've never been to Mumbai, they suddenly feel so free. They feel like they can travel, they can be who they are. And that is a very telling component, the feeling, the perception of that I am safe. Why is that? That is because Mumbai has always had a lot of women working. A lot of women, when they go out to work, they use public spaces, they use public transport. Now, the safety levels may be different as compared to Delhi and Mumbai, but at the same time, the feeling and the perception that I belong here because I can see more of my own kind at all times of day and night in different spaces is very important. Take, for example, a second example that I would like to give you. I'm from Goa. Goa is my hometown, and Goa is where everybody in India goes to relax. And why is that? Because women can wear whatever they want and not feel judged, not feel like they have to adhere to societal expectations. Somehow in Goa, all inhibitions, dissipate. That is what we are talking about when we talk about inclusion in urban
Yeah.
spaces. Can we be out and be ourselves at different times of day and night without having to always second guess ourselves, without having to be conscious about who's around us, what's going to happen, play out different scenarios in our mind, always, at the subconscious level, wonder what's going to happen next. So I feel, for cities are going to be spaces where I think they are saying by 2050, 70% of the world's populations are going to be living in
Mhm.
urban areas. It's not just a place where you work, it's also where you live and where you play, more importantly. We shouldn't forget that. And so,
Yeah.
how are we designing these spaces? Another example I can give you is I was in Stockholm several years ago, and they had a museum night where all the museums were free for everyone. And I remember also going with my friends to the museums for free, and we hopped onto a train at midnight. And I suddenly noticed, I looked around me and I noticed the train was full of women and children. That's a safe and inclusive urban space where you're just feeling comfortable.
Yeah. And picking, would you pick the probably the most gender inclusive or equitable city you've ever lived in? And in that, what were some of the unique features that distinguish that place from the others that you have had the experience of living in?
I don't think there is one single place that is totally gender inclusive, but there are shades of it. For example, I now partly live in Washington, D.C. And I feel it's a woman's city because if you think of the US government, most of the workers, the interns, the volunteers, the aides are women. So you can walk into a bar by yourself and sit at the counter and not feel like you're in a strange place because for you might find at least two other women also having a drink or having dinner by themselves, and it is not an odd sight. So I pick these kind of incidents in different cities. For example, I love Europe. The public transport is so great. You don't need a car. You can walk. They are very walkable cities. Public transport is the mode that you get around by. I go to Berlin pretty often. I feel very safe over there. London is also great with the extensive tube system, and they have very visible signs for you to call. Now, again, I won't say that every
Yeah.
city has is safe and doesn't have its own problems, but I feel there should be some effort by the institutions to do their part in making it safe and designing it accordingly. Even like I said in Stockholm,
Mhm.
I have walked on a completely lonely, dark street late in the night and not felt unsafe. But would I do that in
Yeah.
Delhi? Would I do that in Bombay also now? No, I would think twice.
I mean, I'll give you a personal example of a project we worked on, safety from a different perspective. And here we were designing kind of, if you will, technology interventions for, in this case, inclusion and equity. We had picked older people because we design services and transportation networks and all other things looking at the young, those who are working, who are traveling a lot. But there's a big segment and growing of those who remain at home or in care situations, etc. And it was a simple thing that these people found it very unsafe to cross the street simply because the traffic light was timed and wasn't timed for someone who was old, right? And so it was very simple in terms of just putting some cameras and actually doing some AI work to know that if someone was old, maybe in a wheelchair or in crutches, then the time for crossing was extended, and traffic just stopped for a little longer. And that, I can't tell you what an impact it had. This was in Poland, on just the people feeling safe, being able to go from one place to another when they chose to walk. You know.
So, Parna, I can give you so many examples. So, for example, a mother with two infants, maybe an infant and a
Yeah.
toddler. In Bombay, I don't know about Delhi, but in Bombay, most of the pavements are unwalkable. They're not smooth, they're
Hmm.
at a height, so you can't even, if you're in a wheelchair, you have a pram, you have mobility issues, it's impossible to walk. And then you have all these hawkers or other, people occupying the pavement, so forcing you to walk on the road, which means that people with limited mobility for whatever reason, whether age, ability, or even if it's a mother with two kids or one kid, cannot be mobile, cannot use the devices that they have, right? I was in London. My cousin had just given birth, so we went out and we had a full day sightseeing, going to the museum so that her older son could be occupied. We went to the market, we went everywhere, and I was watching her and I was thinking, I don't think we would have that same flexibility and mobility in, at least in Mumbai. And when I'm talking about Mumbai, and if Mumbai doesn't have that infrastructure, I wonder if other cities have that infrastructure in India. If one of your top
Yeah.
cities doesn't have it, right? Talking about traffic lights, I would love to share this example. So, as part of our safety walks, we often invite citizens and young people, girls, to look at public infrastructure and tell us how do they feel about it. What does that space evoke for them in terms of memories, but also experiences. And there was this one incident, one program we did where we paired a young, able bodied woman with a disabled woman. So either she was blind or in a wheelchair or had hearing disabilities. And this particular walk was with blind women and able bodied women. And we sent them out, and it was one of the busy streets in Dadar, and there was this major traffic light. You won't believe, it was so difficult for them to cross. I had my heart in my mouth, but everybody returned safely. And the first thing the able-bodied women said, we thought we had problems in the city, but we had no clue how, our colleagues were traversing the city with limited sight or no sight. And their freedoms are further curtailed because, under the guise of safety, their families do not send them out alone. You often see a blind man walking on the streets in India, but how often do you see a sole blind woman? And that's
Yeah.
not only because of the infrastructure, it's also because we don't allow them their freedoms to move around.
Yeah. We don't even, I think there's a gap because we don't even factor that in for the most part during the planning stages and as we are designing a service or an access to a station or an access to a public building or whatever. It just doesn't enter into the equation. I was reading interestingly that in Tokyo and in Japan now, they are forcing city planners and all who work on these mobility and other issues to wear special suits. It doesn't allow you to move very freely. It constrains your vision. It constrains your hearing a little bit. And then they are asked to move around in the city in that special suit, because only then do they get that full experience of what is it like to be an 85-year-old, a 90-year-old, because people are living to be that old and they're still, having to be independent and move around.
That's empathy and lived
So interesting.
experience, right?
Yes,
And that's also the reason
exactly.
why part of my work is about gender equality and trying to get more women in these spaces in management positions or designer positions so that diverse views and perspectives are taken into account.
Exactly. Do you have any special stories, anecdotes from, kind of real success stories about something that you did that had a disproportionately positive impact?
Yes, I mean, a lot of these are about biases, right? Sociocultural norms that
Hmm.
foster these stereotypes that we take it for granted, and therefore we are not actively thinking about the lived experiences of people. So in Satara, which is almost rural Maharashtra, but not very far from Pune and Bombay, um, these girls, they would have to travel by mini buses to their schools. They don't have, often they are like little hamlets, and the schools are
Mm.
further away from their village. So, as you know, if a minibus is meant for 20 people, they shove 30 people into it. So, who experiences it adversely? The journey to the school is the women and girls. And these girls were pinched and groped and touched, and they had an awful journey, and it disturbed their peace of mind. Now many of them wanted to drop out of school, but at the same time had aspirations of becoming doctors and teachers and joining the Indian army, etc. So it was only during our workshops when we were talking to them about safety and different kinds of harassment, and that they have rights, and these are the Indian laws that punish the perpetrator, that one of the girls, she was bold enough to speak up and share her experience. And when she shared, everybody else shared. Now, until then, she thought it was her own singular experience and it was probably her fault, because that's how society often makes
Mm.
you feel.
Yeah.
And then we said, okay, what is it that you want to do now? And then they said, we want our own bus. So they gathered the courage, made a representation to their parents who were totally unaware of what was happening. And of course, the parents were shocked. And these girls said, we do want to go to school. We don't want to drop out of school, but we want our own bus. And they made the case for their own bus. Now they have their own bus and they can go to school. And like this, we have so many stories where, if you have the data, because ultimately what we do is the collection of stories showing patterns and
Mm.
trends on our map, but these are hyper local. When we have this kind of data that allows you to make the case not as a single person but as a group, we've seen police change beat patrol timings, municipal authorities fix broken infrastructure, transport authorities respond positively, and so on and so forth. So there are so many of these stories. But I feel the hardest part is, breaking this socio cultural norm of keeping silent and helping people break the taboo, because often these experiences are linked to honor.
Do you have any examples of, how this plays out in very large transformative projects? The typical ones that are funded by the international aid organization. Probably that's one of those organizations that you work with when you're in Washington D.C., the World Bank,
Yeah.
USAID, those type of things. An example of a project and how it plays
So
out there.
recently, in fact, last year we were funded by Vital Voices, which is a nonprofit
Hmm.
set up
Mhm.
by Hillary Clinton. And they had a grant from US State Department, where they wanted to, you know, where Safe City is listed as a resource for survivors. But under this project, they funded 10 country chapters led by Vital Voices networks, where they use Safe City, the tech platform, in their own work in their own communities. And we had partners from Philippines, Kenya, Croatia, Romania, Netherlands, Brazil, all different countries, and in different contexts, they use the app. And we had such wonderful stories that came out, So either mayors' offices were using it to strengthen and build trust with the community. So, whilst, say, for example, the mayor of Quezon City, the Philippines, they have wonderful one stop crisis centers. I've been there, it's beautiful, right? And they have a lot of resources for survivors, but again, not many survivors were you availing of these resources. But the mayor endorsed the Safe City app, endorsed the anonymous reporting, and her team at the local level, called the barangay level, they would respond in real time to what was appearing on the map. So if somebody was reporting stalking, they would send out a communique to the community saying,
Mm.
these are the resources for stalking. We have a special workshop on how to be a better bystander. Or if it was intimate partner violence, domestic violence, they would do the same. And every Saturday, they would have workshops that were resonant with what was appearing on the map. And over a period of time, the trust between the institutions and the community increased, so much so that there was an uptake in the resources being used, which is a clear demonstration that you have to meet the community where they are. Another example was in Romania. Our partners over there were working with Ukrainian refugees, for example. Now, those women were, of course, facing trauma of the war, of being displaced because of the war, starting a new life in a new country. But in addition, they were also being harassed in public spaces. And so the partners worked with the police and the refugees and created the safe space, educating the public, meeting them, meeting their needs, etc. So I feel in different contexts, we have different stories. Another one is Kenya, for example. Kenya, we work with a partner who works in the largest slum. So it's an informal settlement. Google Maps doesn't even work over there because there are no street names. Nevertheless, we are able to collect the data not only through the mobile phones or web apps, but also through papers. So somebody fills out a paper form and the partner organization uploads it. We were able to cluster the data, find indicators, work with religious leaders, work through community radio to educate the community. Even they use the data to make a case for expansion of the definition of sexual harassment in public spaces, which wasn't currently part of their law. So there are multiple ways that one can use it. Use a tool like Safecity and use the data that emerges. The first step is really understanding what is going on, and then second is how can we change it. And it forces you to think about urban spaces. I remember going to meet this the chief urban planner in Nairobi, and she says, "Oh, I can make the space a positive space." And I said, "How will you do that?" And she says, "With colors, with activity." So if it is a street where girls are being harassed, what is on that street? Is it a lighting issue? It may not be a lighting issue,
Yep.
but you can paint it in bright colors, so it becomes cheerful, it becomes pleasant.
Warm and
Yeah.
inviting. Yeah.
And that coincides with the broken windows theory, where something is decrepit, it attracts unwanted negative attention, right? But you can also create positive interactions in that space by maybe introducing a kiosk which sells things, you know So,
Yeah.
and that's eyes on the street, which is the urban planning principle of how do you make spaces inclusive as well.
I should introduce you to some friends over at Santa Fe Institute. They've done some very remarkable research. As you were saying, many of these informal settlements, the slums, are not mapped, not documented. And what they've done is figure out how to create the most efficient route. The problem here is if you have an emergency, you have a fire, you have someone wanting an ambulance, etc., they don't know how to get in there to provide aid because it's unmapped, right? And they have figured out through different sources and other social media and how people move, etc., to create these maps to say the most efficient place to get from the outside, the terminus of where the map ends, and then there's a big gray blob to a point within that, which you can geolocate perhaps, is this. This is how you can get from place A to place B. It has all sorts of applications, but some really, really fascinating mathematical work and algorithmic work that went into creating this. Louis Betancourt, he's now at University of Chicago, but I should put you in touch with them. We should connect
Thanks for
later.
that. And that brings me to an important point, which is part of our work, which is community participation. So,
Hmm.
in all the places that we've worked, the key um, or the critical game changer is the community. We have to involve them. Even if they don't have access to data, if they don't have data literacy skills, if they don't have geo mapping skills, it's okay, because we don't need them for those skills. What we need them is for the local context, which is what you're talking
Yeah.
about. One of the biggest learnings in Kibera, the slum in Nairobi, was girls, they can't change their pattern of traveling. So for example, it's very normal that in a city, if I'm faced with an untoward incident, I will avoid that space, I will change my routing. That's not always the option available for these girls, because they could be at further harm, because they could be kidnapped and trafficked in some areas if they land up over there, or if their parents find them in those spaces, they might think that they are up to no good and curtail their freedoms anyway. So I think bringing a diverse group of people, whether it is those planners in Japan trying to have empathy by walking the streets, but engaging a variety of people in what makes a city inclusive, what would you like from the city, what what should the space look like? I remember we had, as part of a UN Habitat Urban Thinkers campus, we had a youth innovation challenge. And one of the youth teams, they took an abandoned end of the street. It was just a dead end, and they turned it around with the help of community into this beautiful bright space where women could sit, children could play, older people could also interact and engage with each other. And they saw that people were staying out later in the daytime, and also building a sense of community, which is important for safety.
Yes. Yes. I mean, you brought up the topic of community, which I think is very important. But community is also the collection of individuals, right, like us. And so, what, in your opinion, how can we, as individuals, participate and contribute in creating a more, if you will, equitable, gender inclusive, safe urban space?
I believe it starts with your family. So, first, start with your family. Figure out if everybody in your family is feeling safe and inclusive. There are so many families where they don't accept LGBTQ. We've just finished Pride Month, LGBTQ folk, right? Women and girls are not safe to share their experiences, just like that young girl in Satara. It was only with her
Hmm.
community of other young girls that she was able to make the case for safe transport. So, are you first building that safety within your family? Second is, we all live in different communities, whether it's residential or workplace, or even, interest based groups or religious based groups. Are your communities safe? Find out, talk to people, go beyond the normal niceties and ask those probing questions. Are they feeling safe? And then as a community, you can brainstorm solutions. You don't have to solve the world's problems by yourself. You can together say, okay, what is it that we can do together to make this place safer? It could be, when I say place, it doesn't only have to be a physical space, because now we live in a digital world as well.
Yeah.
So what do we need to do? So is it a behavior change, is it an attitudinal change, or is it a physical or an infrastructure change? And then approach the right institutional stakeholders. Again, we've seen in our work, it's not only the police that can make a difference, but there are so many others. People don't,
Mm.
don't even think of religious leaders, for example, but they are powerful influencers in their communities, and you can involve them too. So I feel it starts with home, and then you can branch out in your ecosystem, having you in the center and then taking the circle outside.
Wonderful, wonderful point. Elsa, your work, your app has been groundbreaking, remarkable, and you've been recognized. The remarkable feminist voice in transportation award that you've been a recipient of. What does something like that mean for you, and how do you see that as that award helping either you continue the work or amplifying the message or doing more? But share something about your thoughts on the award.
Yes, I mean, I'm glad that I got the award for transportation in this work, because I spent 20 years in aviation and I feel, there was a lot I did in aviation too, especially as a woman at the top, where now you have a lot of women in the top, but not at that time. Anyway, I do believe that all awards are meant to validate your work, to give you a little bit of a push with visibility and recognition, because people take notice of your work when you get an award. I call them shiny baubles that you pull out of your back pocket when you need to impress somebody or you want some visibility. But other than that, I feel it's really the hard work that the team does on a daily basis that is really important. Every day we are doing something that pushes the boundary, either in societal norm change, or even making one woman feel safer, one child feel safer, through policy implementation, or even giving them the skills or the confidence to report. So, yes, awards are important, but I think it's the everyday work that is even more critical.
Modest in spite of what you've done. But Elsa, it's been a pleasure. We're at the 30-minute mark. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you for sharing your insights, and your enthusiasm and commitment is quite infectious. So I'm sure, that ripple effect of, the ripple spreading and including more will continue. Thank you again
Thank
for
you
being
very
here.
much. Lovely talking to you, Suparno.
Thank you so much, Suparno and Elsa, for that wonderful conversation. It was indeed very enlightening for me, and I'm sure for our audience. I want to thank the audience for being with us and listening to this interesting discussion. As always, our speakers have shown us various paths to restoring the equiverse. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on gender equity in our upcoming episodes. Let's all take actions as individuals, as professionals, as family members towards building an equiverse where every person, regardless of gender, can thrive and succeed. Do collaborate with us to build this new world. We would love to hear from you, your suggestions, your ideas, and your reactions to these conversations. Thank you again for being with us.